Welcome to the Success Story Podcast, the most useful podcast in the world. I'm your host, Scott D. Clary, and today we have an incredible episode. I sat down with Sarah Gibbons. Sarah is ex-Amazon, ex-MySpace, ex-News Corp, and she has an incredible corporate career, but she pivoted into entrepreneurship, as many of my guests do, and I unpack her story. How she started working with leaders who were at a certain point in their career where they didn't feel fulfilled. They felt like they were missing something, even though they had these accolades on paper. And she walks through how she works with leaders to actually find fulfillment and happiness in their career. We speak about leadership. We speak about self-awareness. We speak about how to follow your passions and to even understand what those passions are, and then hold yourself accountable to actually achieving those things so that at the end of the day, you don't go through your entire life, wake up when you're 70, 80, 90, and realize that you've been doing something for your entire life that you aren't happy about or that you weren't satisfied with. So she has some great lessons for anybody that has reached that point in their career. And I was really happy to sit down with her, and she just unpacked all this stuff that I think we usually just glance over when we're busy in our day-to-day lives, just doing. Anyways, really enjoyed the chat with her. I hope you enjoy it as well. Also, this episode is sponsored by Gusto. Gusto is the complete payroll solution provider. They have a special offer for everybody who's listening to the Success Story podcast. If you want to get rid of headache, admin work, payroll work, HR work in your business, stay tuned and you'll definitely want to try them out. Without further ado, another episode of the Success Story podcast. All right, thanks again for joining me. Today, I am sitting down with Sarah Gibbons. Sarah is a leading success coach. She works with creative executives and entrepreneurs in the arts and entertainment industry. She specializes in helping them thrive at the intersection of creativity and impact, how they actually can excel in their careers and with the people that they work with. Sarah's been featured by London Daily, Thrive Magazine. She just finished an interview with the world-renowned photographer Jeff Lipsky on her own Legacy Talk series. She's a digital media veteran. She's worked for giants like Amazon, MySpace, that's throwing it back, and News Corp in the early days, leading their sales team both domestically and in London. She's the mother of 3 boys, and she is obsessed with helping people live their legacy through refining their leadership. Basically, that is how people relate to each other, situations, and it's the only thing that we truly have control over when we build out our careers or our businesses. So I'm very excited to walk through her career, especially with some of the names that she's worked for in the past and how she's pivoted from that into entrepreneurship, and also how she works with people and what she does for them, because I want to dive into what success coach actually means and how it can be useful for people. So Sarah, thank you very much for sitting down. I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, I'm excited. Thanks for having me, Scott. We're going to have some fun.
I'm very excited. I'm very, very excited. Let's dive into your background, because I always like teeing up where you came from. So Amazon, MySpace, and News Corp, where did your career start?
So I chalk it up to I was in the right place at the right time. So I'm from Seattle, and I ended up at a little company called Amazon, which also owns a company called IMDb. For those of you who are in the entertainment world, you know it as Internet Movie Database. And I was hired to be their advertising sales rep. And at the time, there was only one other ad sales rep. This was in 2000. And so that person's name is John Gibbons. He's now my husband, but of course he wasn't at the time. And so it was really the Wild West when you think about digital media back in 2000. And so I was very much thrown into it. I had a bit of a sales background prior. And then coincidentally, times were so different. I was at Sundance Film Festival for work and ended up meeting the founders of MySpace, and we were all flying to LA the next day, and this relationship was taking off with this guy, John. And so I thought, God, I better part ways. So I was at Amazon for quite some time and then ended up going over to MySpace, which then became News Corp. And then the stars aligned and we both were able to go over to London. He opened an office for IMDb, and I was able to go into the News Corp office over there in London and help manage those teams. And it was wild and phenomenal at the same time, but it was very much, I mean, online advertising back then, it wasn't something that was taught in school. And so I really just figured it out. I mean, everything is sort of figure outable, but that's
Hmm.
how I got to. And then once I had my first child, I kind of always knew, as much as I loved digital media and I loved the tech industry, I loved how fast it was. I was missing something that was more service oriented. And I love sales. I also like to beat to my own drum. And so I had the opportunity I met a gal who was over in London who happened to also be from the Seattle area and ended up helping her grow a company called Baby Chino Kids. And so I parlayed into entrepreneurship, got my feet wet there, left News Corp, and then a few years later, when we came back to the U.S., was recruited by some old News Corp veterans, got back into digital media, and then truthfully, I just knew, as much as I loved the people I was working with. It's a very fast-paced industry. I liked just the flexibility, and of course the money and all of that was there, but there was something that was missing from a fulfillment standpoint, and that's where things started to turn, and I started a whole new chapter.
And what did that walk me through the steps that you actually took because you had gone and you'd done some,
Yeah.
I don't know what the term is, side hustling
Yeah.
while you were working.
So I started working. Actually, my husband was working with a career coach, and she was a phenomenal career coach. She was coaching all the Sony execs at the time, and so when he finished up with her, I said, "Well, I'll do some work with you." I didn't really know. I've always loved managing teams, and at the very end of our work, she said, "Would you consider checking out this program?" Getting a master's in spiritual psychology. And truthfully, I thought, oh my God, that sounds so woo woo. This is going to be like a bunch of yoga teachers. And my ego was just having to fit. But anyway, she said, go check it out. And so I went. It was a program that had been going for over 25 years here in Santa Monica, California. It was run by, well, it's still going, Dr. Ron and Mary Holnick. And so I went, I was like, wow, this program, it's a 2-year program. It's a master's in psychology, and it just really grabbed me. Very experiential, but at the same time, the points around leadership really interested me. And so I was pregnant with my third child. I went back to grad school and I was managing a sales team. I don't know how my marriage survived it, but it did. And at the very end of the 2 years, it became apparent that I did not want to go back into digital media, that I really, the part that loved me was always hearing people's stories, but also getting into people's leadership and really helping them see what's possible beyond what they were currently doing. So even if things looked really good on paper, I fundamentally believed that you could still feel a sense of fulfillment and a sense of joy. It didn't have to, you didn't have to have the experience that I had where just because it was good on paper, you couldn't want more. And so
Hmm.
ended up, after those 2 years, started my coaching business, and then everything. I mean, it with a lot of trial and error
That's a
to
big
where I
leap.
am now. But that was
That,
about 9 years ago.
good for you. That's a big leap. That's
Yeah,
very scary. I always
it
try
was
and
really
understand.
scary.
Yeah, very, very. No, I always try and understand the mindset of people that like pivot into entrepreneurship and what
Hmm.
triggers them to do something that is almost like it's counter to the safety
Yeah,
and the predictability of a career. And it's just interesting that you, so actually what would you say that was for you?
yeah,
What was the thing that triggered you? You said you took a course
yeah.
that you thought was a little bit at the onset a little bit airy fairy high level, but then you
Hmm.
actually found value in it. Um,
Yeah. I think it was a couple things. It- I believed in what I was learning. So first and foremost, I it woke something up in me, Scott, and I felt like if other people had access to these kind of tools, then they would experience a greater sense of fulfillment. I think for me, I have always been chasing a sense of aliveness. ever since I was young, I would read obituaries and I would sort of joke with my industry friends from digital media saying, I don't want to get to the end of my life and feel like my obituary only says that I have been, head of online advertising sales and et cetera. And so there was always this, I always had this thirst for growth. I had a thirst for impact and had a thirst for feeling a sense of aliveness. And so I think that, that vision it acted like a magnet and started to pull me through what were really difficult choices because you're right, leaving a corporate job is not easy. We had children at the time. We had a mortgage. We had, just a lot of responsibility. But I also, for me, it also, I got really present to how I define success and that success didn't just look like material things. It didn't look like a really perfect CV, having all the good job titles and the big corporate companies, that if it all came to an end, I knew I wanted to feel differently inside. And so that became the catalyst for me. I think also I worked in reality. So this is one thing I coach, obviously I coach entrepreneurs. I spend time with some, people who are really growing their coaching business. And one of the things I tell people is that we have to work in reality. So I think it's naive to, um, I hear a lot of entrepreneurs say, well, I'm just going to quit my job and then I'm going to start this side hustle and go for it. And that isn't always the most responsible thing. So, um, for me, I was managing a sales team. I was coaching clients on the side until I got to a place where I felt like I could properly make the leap without jeopardizing my family and the contribution that I'd been making, of course, financially. So it happened over time, but I was very much aware of a feeling that I was having inside. And that feeling of aliveness was what I wanted more of.
And you went after it. And I like the way that you
Yeah.
phrased it, that having the perfect credentials on a CV or having even a great paying job is not success or fulfillment once you've achieved it for a
Hmm.
significant period of time. And that's something that, and also it can be also it can be fine for people too. It depends what
Yeah.
that is. So what is fulfillment? This course you took, this 2-year course, was this
Hmm.
identifying what actually drives you in life? Is that what the end
Yeah.
result
So,
was?
yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. I think from one of the biggest lessons I got out of it was that most people look at success as very horizontal. So you
Hmm.
go to school, you get a job, maybe you get married, maybe you buy a house, etc.
Yeah.
When I went back and got my master's in spiritual psychology, it started to introduce to me a way of leading that used practical tools, particularly around communication, that helped me realize, okay, the way in which fulfillment works is through exponential growth, not
Hmm.
through doing this thing that's on a horizontal line, which is what we're trained. And so when I started to play with that and I started to look at things like, what does it mean to live from my values? What does it mean to um, really connect with my own intuition and start to make choices that honor what I want versus these expectations that I had for myself based on parental influence, society influence, and all of that, I started to realize that I was relating to life in a very different way.
Hmm.
And I think more than anything, what I got out of it was that I was, I don't like the word control, but that I had a lot more influence over my life than I thought. So, in most of us human beings, and I still very much have moments of this, we are very much at effect. We are at effect of our circumstances. Whereas when I went through my grad school program, what I got was there's an opportunity for me to really co-create my experience, whether it's with the universe, whether it's with
I
God,
love that.
whatever your belief is.
Yeah.
But it was so empowering because I realized, my gosh, I can create what I want as long as I get clear and I'm paying attention to my mindset and my intention and I'm taking action. What I know to be true is that then the universe meets you at the point of action. So it was
Hmm.
just a very different way of experiencing life, but I gained very tangible tools that I now teach my clients, really around communication and leadership. And so they're having very similar experiences. It doesn't mean that they're Um, by no means does it mean that they are getting out of their current jobs. I mean, some are, but many of them are staying in their current roles, but they're experiencing a level of fulfillment and impact that they didn't think was possible. So it's a very
I know.
long way of saying answering your question.
No, it was a good answer, and the reason why I was digging into that is because there's a lot of wisdom there, and I wanted to highlight that because I knew that you were going to go in this direction, but that's something that I think over the past 2 years, that feeling of losing control when we thought we had everything figured out in career,
Yeah.
in life, gone, right? Completely gone.
Yeah. That's so
And a
true.
very
COVID.
a very practical example would be people that have been in careers for 30 plus years that thought those careers were stable and laid off, furloughed, whatever, and that's no longer a thing. So I appreciate what you're saying, and I've never heard it described the way you've described it just now, but I subscribe to a similar outlook on life about control. I say control, I guess, a little bit more freely because I like to think that I can have some control over the
Hmm.
outcome. With the,
Hmm.
if you have a certain amount of input, then you can have some sort of control over the output. But I
Hmm.
like that a
Hmm.
lot, and that's what so that's a perfect segue. So that's what
Yeah.
you work with individual, and this is what you do. This is what
Yeah.
you
This
teach to
this
people.
is what I do
Yeah.
full time. At the end of the day, the only thing we have control over is how we show up and relate to people,
Hmm.
situations, events in our life. And so I am fascinated with that because where that got me thinking was, all right, that what we're really talking about is leadership. Leadership as a way of being, not
Hmm.
leadership as this position, as a hat that we wear, as a title, as um, as wake up in the morning, I'm a leader, and then I come home from work and I'm not a leader anymore. I realized it was like an epiphany, but that if I start to look at leadership, like we're all in leadership, yes, some of us have titles where we manage
Yeah.
people, but when we wake up in the morning, we show up and how we lead throughout the day and how we impact people, how you and I converse, how I talk with a barista, how I speak to my children, how I work with my clients. That leadership is really my legacy. And so if it all were to end, I love knowing that your legacy doesn't have to be, you know, building a water well in Africa. Your legacy is how you show up and lead throughout the day. And so that got me really excited because I thought, wow, I have an opportunity here to really help people grow their leadership, even if it's just by 4%. If we just shift it by a tiny amount, they're going to create different results. So I work with people. I have a boutique one-on-one business, so I work with a handful of clients there, and then I have several corporate groups, and then I have my own groups that I've put together um, based on, I work with a group of dads, which I love. I work with a group of moms, and then work with a group of executives. But it's all based on a principle and foundation that I've created that's unique to my business called the boards. And so I
Yeah.
have different boards groups for depending on who the audience is.
I saw that. When I was checking out your
Yeah,
website, and
yeah.
okay, so let's. So I want to dig into that point you just touched on leadership, and obviously, so great points. Leadership is not CXO. Leadership is how you conduct yourself in your life, and I think that
Yeah.
that mental shift or that lens that you look at leadership through is an important distinction. So what are some practical steps just for we a lot of
Hmm.
people here are obviously executives, but also moms and dads. What would be
Yeah.
some overarching step that people should
Yeah.
try and take to be better leaders in their life and
Mm.
envision and understand their impact?
Yeah, I love that question. So, one of the first, think about leadership as who you be informs what you do.
Hmm.
So, if you are disgruntled, overwhelmed, and anxious on the inside, then as you are doing whatever it is you need to do, that's the experience you're going to have. So, one of the best ways to get really clear on who you are is to define your values. And it's amazing, Scott. I'll start working with clients and I'll say, okay, let's talk about your values. Do you know your values? And they'll say, yeah, yeah, I know my values. Okay, great. Tell me your values. You scratch the surface a little bit. They don't know their values. So for anybody who's watching, actually, you can go to my website. If you sign up for my email, I have put together a super simple turnkey guide to help you figure out your values. Everyone has around, 5 to 7 values. And once you get clear on your values and you define them on your terms, then you have a very different experience, because if you think about it, if you start to make decisions from your values rather than expectations of what you think you should be doing or what you think your family should be doing, already you're going to have an experience that is much more in alignment with what matters to you. So for me, one of my top values is connection. So
Mhm.
as I'm moving throughout the day, as well as impact, I'm asking myself, what value does this align with? If I need to make a decision, okay, is this in accordance with my values? That's a very different experience than, all right, what is it I need to get done today? What should I be doing? And so it allows people to feel so much more empowered. So I would say for anybody who's watching, the very first thing you could do if you did nothing else was get clear on your values, define them, and then start to play with, what does it look like to live from your values? What does it look like to make decisions from your values? And you'll be amazed at the different kind of results you get both in the workplace and at home.
Hey, Scott here. We're just going to take a second and thank the sponsor of today's episode, Gusto. This is a one-stop shop, one place you can go to take care of all the payroll issues, all the payroll stresses that you have to deal with as a business owner. Look, 2020 has been a rough year. We can all agree on that, and 2021 is pretty rough too. But if there's one thing that small business owners don't need is more headache. One thing that you've learned in the past year is that you have to focus on your business, because Gusto isn't just built with businesses in mind, is built with the people who run businesses in mind. Their payroll system is the easiest to use, and I've used a lot over my career. Gusto automatically calculates paychecks. It files all of your payroll taxes. It also helps with time tracking, health insurance, and a ton of other HR nightmares that you just don't want to deal with. It also gives you access to HR experts who can help you. It's super easy to get started and set up. The switching pains are nil. Why? Because they will move over all of your data for you. 94% of customers who switch to Gusto recommend Gusto as the best payroll solution they've ever used. And this is the offer you're waiting for. Anybody who's listening right now on the Success Story podcast, you get 3 months free. This means you can try it without any stress. Go to gusto.com/Scott. That's gusto.com/Scott, and that will give you 3 months free to try it out for yourself. Play around with it, see if it works for your business. I'm almost positive it will. All right, let's get back to the show. And I guess my question, because everybody, like you said, thinks they know their values, and even if they even if they do have an understanding of what their
Yeah.
values are, we slip. We slip all the time.
Yeah, we
I
do.
slip probably 200 times a day on. I think I'm a good person. I think I have good values, but something rubs me the wrong way, and then I
Yeah.
react. Or the conversation after the thing that rubbed me the wrong way is now. That the emotion that's gone to that conversation is a negative emotion, even though the person had no bearing on what actually triggered me in the first place. These are very common human tendencies.
Yes, they are.
So how do you get rid of?
Yeah.
What's
So
the
I will tell
answer?
you. Um, so really great point what you said. So one of the biggest principles I got out of my master's program in spiritual psychology is that if if we get triggered as human beings, it's an unresolved issue of that belongs to us that's getting triggered. It actually has nothing to do with you. So if you are being disrespectful to me, it doesn't mean that you get a hall pass for being that way, but it's on me to look at, okay, why did that trigger me so much?
Hmm.
So as a coach, one of the things that I do is I invest a lot in my own mentorship. So I work with a team of coaches, which, by the way, for anybody who's looking at a coach, you want to make sure the coach that you're working with is actually investing in themselves. One of
Hmm.
the best tools is called completion. And it's a process where you are getting complete on your side of the fence of what you're bringing to the table. So the ultimate goal is, if you've got energy on you, Scott, about something, that is going to carry over into how you show up and relate to someone. So you want to take on a very practical exercise, which is called completion. It involves writing 3 different letters. It takes no more than 20 minutes. But what it does is it helps you first and foremost, express what's there for you, whether you're mad, you're frustrated, you're upset, whatever it is, get it all out. Then it's about taking a look at, okay, what's there for me to own? What can I be responsible for? And then the third piece is around what can I acknowledge, both the other person and both for me. And sometimes I have to do completion multiple times around the same situation or the same person. But it is truly the only tool that I have learned that my coaches have taught me. If I want to be able to come into a situation and feel neutral so that I can approach it from a very clear leadership, then that's on me to get complete. And it doesn't require anyone to apologize to me. It's really on me. And I think that's, if people went around in the world getting complete on their own stuff so they weren't lobbing their own stuff over to other people, we would have very different experiences throughout the
Mhm.
day. Because you're right, we're human beings. It's not that we go through the day, and it's not that we're in leadership 24/7. It's that we fall out of leadership. And what I always say to my clients, it's like, how quickly can you get back into leadership rather than withdrawing for a day or getting into it with a colleague and, going down that rabbit
Mhm.
hole. Great
And
question.
I love that. I keep wanting to, just double down on the fact that this definition of leadership is truly changing who you are to be a better person. That's really
That's right.
the end goal. And that actually, when we first connected, one of the things I wanted to speak to you about was coaching as a concept.
Yeah.
Of course, when you look at it through that lens, when you look at the ability to become a better person in everything you do, it's not hard to understand why that could be a good thing to subscribe
Hmm.
to. But let's speak about coaching, and as opposed to me just going on. It's funny because I don't go on YouTube and I don't investigate this, but say I need to be sold on coaching, right? I
Yeah.
just well, why would I pay somebody to teach me this when I can just go figure it out myself?
Yeah.
So, that's something that I think always comes up with coaches because people need to buy into it. They've either already bought into
Hmm.
it, or a lot of people will say, I have no need for that. That's not going to
Hmm.
positively impact me. They
Hmm.
and it's funny because people get a personal trainer, but
I know.
I think it's a physical, like they see the physical result. And how do you
Hmm.
measure the ROI on a coach? How do you measure whether or not a coach? I don't think anybody would shirk like a good coach or somebody that can actually help
Hmm.
them. But how do you sell somebody, or how do you not sell somebody? How do you prove to somebody that you can actually help them
Mm.
impact their life?
Oh gosh, such a great question, and so many places that we could go with it. I'm just thinking where I want to start with this. I
Yeah,
think
because you deal with it,
y-
you live it every day.
yeah, I do. The coaching industry has become one of the biggest industries where
Hmm.
money is spent, and at the same time, the bar is so low that anybody can get into coaching, which is dangerous because it can create an integrity issue. And so I can't speak for other coaches. I can only speak for myself and why I invest in coaching and why my people invest in coaching. And I think at the end of the day, it's because we by nature want to be comfortable. We don't want to feel any sense of discomfort. If you are wanting to deepen your connection with clients in service to doubling your bottom line, if you are wanting to create a bigger impact, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, any of those goals are going to require you to do something and behave differently than you're currently doing. In order to do that, you're going to have to feel uncomfortable. We don't like to feel uncomfortable. A I know for me, and I joke with my clients, but I truly believe at the end of the day, the reason that they pay me isn't necessarily for accountability. It's because I'm willing to say things to them that nobody else would say.
Hmm.
So, for example, a couple of years ago, I was in an enrollment conversation um, with one of the top executive creative directors in the country. He's just an unbelievable human being, but his work is out of this world. And he kept repeating this story. And finally, I just looked at him and I said, "Can I give you a reflection?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I am so bored by this story. If I'm bored by it, you must be bored by it." And he laughed and he said, "You're the first person that has told me they're bored by it." He said, "I'm so bored by it." And it was a story in an event that happened in the news that he was a part of, a company that had a huge issue with. And he said he hired me on the spot. I mean, that's when the conversation changed and we
Hmm.
started to talk about what would it look like to work together. So I truly believe people who value growth by nature will be interested and will want to consider coaching. But really, the role of a good coach is to keep reflecting back to clients what they're seeing in their way of being. And we all know this, but our relationship to feedback, including my own, and I've done a lot of work around feedback, that is not easy to hear or work with. And
Hmm.
so it's less about, okay, here's the program we're going to work and here's what we're going to do every week. It's like, no, let me tell you what I'm noticing right now in your presence. Let me tell you what I'm noticing in your tone. Let me tell you what I'm seeing. And so that kind of level of work requires a whole different type of leadership if you want to have a
Hmm.
different experience in the physical world, but also internally. So,
And that's what, it's funny. I think that half of finding the right coach is having the right mindset going into it.
hmm
Like anything in
hmm
life, the success is dependent on, again, your own input, right? But
completely agree.
having that mindset and being able to listen to that feedback and accepting it and wanting to incorporate that into your daily habits and your life, that's
Yeah.
somebody that's going to be that's somebody, in my opinion, that's going to be quite successful regardless of
I would totally
yeah
agree. There has to be a sense of willingness to
yeah
want to be curious. They don't, you don't have to come in with already being vulnerable and already being brave. But I see my role is I am constantly flexing my client's range of being able to sit in the discomfort. And the more that
hmm
you widen your range and you're able to sit in the discomfort when circumstances aren't what you want, that's when you're going to, leadership happens in the moment. That's when you're going to grow your leadership. And that is when you're going to start to experience more of what you want. But you're right, there has to be a willingness. For the first time, I had a client leave one of my groups. Wildly bright client, lovely human being. Her relationship to feedback just didn't jive with the way in which I coach. That's okay. It's not a make wrong,
hmm
but there has to be a willingness there that really really starts with the person, not necessarily with the coach.
hmm No, very interesting. So let's sort of finish on this note for people that have been listening, and then I'll ask you a couple rapid fire
Yeah.
questions that I like to get out of people. But uh, any last advice for people that have ever thought of, because I know that people that are listening to this,
Yeah.
if they've thought about a coach, this will be something that will sort of get them to investigate further. If they have no interest, like you said, if there's no willingness, you're
Mhm.
not gonna convert that person to somebody that's probably going to look into it today, maybe in a couple months from now. But if there was never any willingness, then it's probably not going to change their opinion. So I would say that for people that do want to look into this more, those are the people that obviously those are the people that you want to guide down the right path. What are things that they should or shouldn't, what they should be looking for, or what they should stay away from when they're looking for a coach?
Yeah, great question. So, if I understand it correctly, what should people look for if they're looking for a coach?
Yeah, but also like red flags, I guess. So things that, like you
Yeah,
said, there's a
yeah.
low barrier to entry.
There's a lot. So, I
So
think if you are clicking on ads on any social media and there's a coach talking about how they grew 6 or 7 figures in a year, I would say that's a red flag. I think choosing a coach um, requires really also trusting your intuition. And at the same time, it's a relationship that has to go both ways. So I know
mhm,
I spend a lot of time in conversation with people, really getting them and wanting to understand what's working in their life and what isn't working in their life. So I will
Hmm.
sometimes I spend several months with someone. Sometimes it's over the course of a couple of years before we start working together. So I don't think it's something that you rush into.
Hmm.
I know for me, what's important, because I invest in my coaching, is that I want to work with coaches who invest in their own leadership. So there's the running of a coaching business, and then there's your coaching skills. The one that's really important to me is working with a coach who you know is constantly investing in their own coaching skills, because at the end of the day, you can't, I believe, you can't take a client somewhere that you've never been. So if I have not worked in my own discomfort and my own level of vulnerability and my own level of with the relationship to feedback, it's going to be very difficult then for me to take someone where they need to go. So I would say do your research, take a look at what, ask, coaches that you're in conversation with, what kind of coaching, or do you work with a coach, for starters, and start to get clear. The other thing is, I think what stops people is that, and I hear this a lot, both from men and women, I don't know what I want. I just don't know what I
Hmm.
want. And then we get stuck in the how. I would say don't stop there. Don't let that get in the way of you pursuing a conversation with a coach. I know for me, I spend a lot of time with my clients helping them get clear on what that vision is. What would it look like for you to use your God given talents? What would it look like to be in a relationship where you really feel heard and seen and connected? That vision out here, and then looking at where you are, then it's the job of the coach to close that gap. But I think that's one of the places where, if getting into a conversation with a coach and assessing, how do we work together? What does this feel like? Do I feel uncomfortable? Because if you do in a good way, that's a positive thing. If
Hmm.
you're in conversation with a coach and feel like they're not challenging you and it's easy peasy, I don't think that's going to get you the results that you want. So it's a process, and at the same time, it requires both people to really do their homework.
Good. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do a couple rapid fire just to pull out
Okay.
some things from your career for people that are listening. Um, what was this is a little bit of a pivot. So what
Yeah.
was the biggest challenge in your career, entrepreneurial or otherwise, that you overcame, and how did you do that?
The biggest challenge for me was when I moved to London, and all of a sudden I was managing a team of Europeans and I was an American. And I had to learn not only how to put deals together with different currencies, but I had to learn how to work with a team that all represented different cultures. And that's where
Mhm.
I noticed my leadership, more than anything, really mattered. If I needed to have a connection very quickly with this team, I needed to build trust with this team. The rest of the stuff would come with time, but I had to invest full on into the connection and the trust so that we could operate as a team and not just a bunch of superstar individuals trying to sell. So I think that for me was, I mean, it was challenging, but at the same time, it was,
That is tough.
wildly rewarding.
Very good. What's one person who's a mentor who's taught you something in your life that you're thankful for, but also what is the thing that they taught you?
Oh my gosh. Um, can it be someone who's not alive anymore?
Of course, yeah, yeah. It could be
Okay,
anybody. It
great.
could be anybody.
So
Yeah.
I reflect a lot on my grandfather. It was my mother's dad. And the reason is because he had a lot of accolades. He went to MIT. He was head of international of engineering at Boeing. But what I got from him was really his values. And his values were unique to him, but they stood out so much to me that that is what I, more than anything, that's what I really experienced from him. So when I think about his legacy, while he did amazing things in the world, in the physical world, what I loved so much was this idea of living with a service-oriented heart,
Hmm.
valuing connection, both with colleagues and family, valuing connection with the environment. And so it just really became apparent to me that all the doing out there that I can do is wonderful, but what people are really going to remember is how I show up and relate to them and the impact that I have on them. And so I think about that all the time, and I really think that came from the relationship that I had with him, but also watching him and how he interacted with people. And I think it's sort of a lost art because we now live in a world that is so focused on
Hmm.
the physical world and what people are
Yeah.
doing, and it just doesn't carry weight compared to that.
No, I understand. I understand like how that could be impactful, especially because you're right. We're more connected than ever before, but yet we're also more distant, I find, than ever before.
So
So
true. Yeah, it's such a
interesting.
yeah, it
Um,
is.
okay, what's one lesson you would tell your 20-year-old self?
Oh my gosh, stop trying to get it right. You can always course correct, but trying to get it right limits experiences, it limits your own potential. And at the end of the day, you can always course correct. And I think I spent a lot of time trying to do the right thing. And I'm finding now in my business, I'm much more courageous. And I've certainly made mistakes and had programs that haven't worked. And now I just can look at it. And, my one thing I tell my team is it's fine if we make mistakes, as long as we harvest the gold from it and we identify it and we learn from it, then it's all good. So I would think just, stop trying to get it right.
I love that.
What does that even mean to
Um,
get it right, you know?
yeah, it's a good point. What is
Yeah. What
right?
is it?
You know,
Yeah.
you're always going to
Yeah.
be doing new things, trying new things, learning new things.
Yeah.
There's no finish line in life. You're always
No.
doing different and more and whatever.
Yeah.
Um, what's a resource, a podcast or a book that somebody should go check out that's impacted you?
Oh my gosh. This is like, when someone asks you what your favorite movie is and you're like, well,
Yeah.
you draw a blank. Oh, I have so many books. Okay, well, I have one sitting on my desk right now, so I'll just roll with this one. I go back to this book all the time, Brene Brown's book, Dare to
Hmm.
Lead. You know, I love, love that book. There's a whole phenomenal section on leadership books that you can get, but I also think I read a lot of memoirs, and Brandy Carlisle is one of my favorite singers. I grew up in Seattle, so I've done work, I've known her for 20 years. And even her memoir that came out this spring, called Broken Horses, there's amazing lessons in it. And so I guess what I would say to people is that if you are someone who doesn't necessarily enjoy reading like a tactical book with tools and habits, that's fine. Pick up a memoir, pick up a book, a memoir or something, and just look at someone's leadership and how they show up and interact with their life. There's beautiful lessons in that. Or Michelle Obama's book is a great
Hmm.
example of another book where just exquisite lessons. And so I am a slow reader, but I like to try to read 15 minutes every day. And I find just by doing that, it expands my thinking and gets my creativity going. And so I'm noticing all your books back there. And I mean, there's just so many out there. I have lots of
There's a lot.
resources. You can go to my website and look at my books. But I will say, I generally always have Brene Brown's Dare to Lead book out on my desk, and it's it's a go-to, especially for
Good.
my creative world that I
Yeah.
work with.
Very good.
Yeah.
And last question, what does success mean to you?
I feel successful throughout the day if I am staying true to my values. If I am out of integrity with my values, then I won't feel like a success. And
Mm.
so I keep my values on a note card next to me, or I'm actually in my husband's office today, but if I'm in my office, I've got them behind my computer. But I know for me, if I'm living from connection and my faith and impact and service, that I am going to feel a sense of aliveness. So I guess at the very end of the day, I'm looking at a sense of aliveness. For me, one of the worst experiences would be to get through my life and feel like I was either bored or underutilized, not
Mhm.
using my God given talents, and that I was just asleep at the wheel. And so when I say that out loud, I realize it has nothing to do with owning a house,
Mhm.
kind of car I drive, the amount of money. Now, it's not to say that I don't like nice things. Of course, I love nice things. I'd be lying if I said that I didn't. I love making money. I always have. That's why I've stayed in sales. But I've been doing this long enough, working in the real world, to know that that's not what's going to make me a success or feel successful. But if I'm in alignment with my values, then
Good.
I feel pretty darn good.
You're very self-aware, which is that's one of the one things
You
that
tell my
I've
husband that, Scott, because I have plenty of moments where he's like, "Remember what you do for a living?" So I appreciate that. I can be a little bit of the pot calling the kettle black. I am the first to say, like any of my clients or like the coaches I work with, I my humanity is my humanity, and I make mistakes. But I will say I have a very strong toolkit that allows me to take a look at what I can be responsible for.
Mhm.
But I too have my blind spots, but I have coaches that are reflecting back to that to me all the time. And it's
Good.
super uncomfortable, but
Yeah.
I love it because the more that the more that they help me see the water I'm swimming in, the more that I can be of service to my clients or my boys or my husband or my
Mhm.
family. So, but I appreciate that. But it's a work in progress. But I do commit to it. It's something that I'm proud of. But I put a lot of work and intention into it for sure.
Good. No, it shows,
Yeah.
and I think that's also one of one of those traits that is a leading indicator for success. That when people are
Yeah, it's a
very
great.
self-aware.
Yeah, that's a really great point. You're right. I guess uh, I guess I'm a little jaded because I work with people all day who by
Mm-hmm.
nature are committed to becoming self-aware, so I've kind of forgotten, but then all I have to do is get on the 405 and have,
Mm-hmm.
someone cut me off, and then I'm like, "Oh, I'm spiraling out." And I'm like, "I'm not. I'm just like everybody else."
All right.
Yeah.
Most importantly, where do people go and connect with you? Your website and your
Yeah.
socials.
Yes, so go to my website. It is sarahgibbons.co, not .com. And then, of course, you can connect with me I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I do Legacy Talks. My Instagram is Sarah Gibbons Co. I have a Legacy Talk coming up this Wednesday. They are a live talk series that I do once a month. And the whole intention behind those conversations are to experience people's legacy and leadership in the moment. So
Mhm.
they're really fun, and it's a really great opportunity to see the results of the coaching work that I do, but also to uh, ask questions and be a part of a really cool conversation. So follow me on social, drop me a line at my website, and I'm always up for having a conversation. If someone is listening and wants to learn more about coaching and experience my coaching, we'll get you in my diary and time set up. But please don't sit there and you know feel anxious or overwhelmed or underutilized, because really am here to help you if you want it.